I've got a copy of Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III here in the U.S. That game was $80 when it came out, $70 or $80 for the Super Nintendo in 1994 when it came out here in the States. I remember Killer Instinct. Look at Super Punch-Out. Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2, $79. The minimum price for a Super Nintendo game that I ever remember seeing was maybe $50.
Renegade Online.
$450. Now, this has caused a great deal of consternation. This is from Business Wire. There's a lot of people out there like, oh my God, I can't believe they're going this expensive. I can't believe that the games are going to be $80 and all this. And I said, guys, look, and this is going to be unpopular for some of you watching. This is supply and demand. This is total supply and demand and price elasticity. And Nintendo knows, and they're right, that everything is in their favor. And this is what they're going to do. When they see people out there constantly spending $100, $120 for getting deluxe editions, advanced copies of games, and they're spending $80 for, AAA games and all this, it's not about whether or not it's AAA. It has nothing to do with the fact of what the development costs were. Oh, Ubisoft, but they can charge $80 for Assassin's Creed because they spent $400 million. Not really, because they're not going to be able to sell, in my opinion, I don't think at this point, I don't think they're going to be able to sell enough copies to really make any kind of profit on the game, because the game itself is not something that's attracting a big enough audience. It does not have price elasticity. It does not have the demand side of the curve to warrant what they're charging. And we'll find out soon enough if Assassin's Creed Shadows winds up going on sale for $50 or $60 relatively quickly. Damn the development costs. If you're a company like Nintendo right here, okay, and you are trying to sell the best product you can, sell as many copies of the product that you can. And the idea is to make as much money as you possibly can for the people that own the company, which are the shareholders. Why wouldn't you sell Mario Kart and Donkey Kong and Zelda and Metroid at $79? Why wouldn't you in 2025? Because the vast majority of your audience, I dare say 90%, are still going to pay it. I realize there's some people out there that will get discouraged by the price increases. Oh, okay, these games aren't $60 anymore. Now they're $80. Guess what? Most people are going to pay it because those IPs and those games are basically evergreen properties. They are constant big successes. Every iteration of those games that come out make Nintendo a fortune. They make them a lot of money because the development costs aren't outrageous. It's IPs they already control. They already know exactly what to do with. They stick to the same plan every time, and they know what they can get out of it, and people keep showing up to buy it. So guess what they're going to do? If the audience out there, if the market has now been conditioned easily to pay $79 for a new release, $69 for a new release, then why shouldn't Nintendo? Just because it doesn't have a $300 or $400 million production budget and marketing budget. Maybe it's got 100 million, 150. I kind of doubt that a lot of these Nintendo games, maybe Zelda, a little bit different. I don't know. But these games do not have the type of development cost, I'm sure, as most of these big, super high-end graphic games. But that's not the point. The point is that they still get just as big or bigger audiences than a lot of these really expensive, high-graphic, high-end AAA games. The supply and the demand meet for Nintendo, and the price elasticity is there. I could be wrong. This game could come out and it could flop, but I highly doubt it. People are still going to pay for this. I'm going to pay for this because we enjoy it, because it's a good product, and I'm willing to pay for it. And I think most of the people out there right now that are dismayed by it I think probably going to still end up buying it. And you got to remember, the market is not just here in the States. The market is global. And the Nintendo Switch it's one of the biggest selling consoles on the planet. I think it's even more popular, in the Pacific Rim, Japan and China, Korea, than even the PlayStation in terms of number of consoles sold. And again, when you go back and you look historically, now I don't know what newspaper this was. I see a 1-800 number up there, so I'm assuming this has to be North America. This is probably the US. But yeah, I've got a copy of Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III here in the US. That game was $80 when it came out, $70 or $80 for the Super Nintendo in 1994 when it came out here in the States. I remember Killer Instinct. I don't think I own a copy of that one, but I remember playing it at a friend's house. I don't remember it being 87. Maybe that was around Christmas. Look at Super Punch-Out. Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2, $79. 67. The minimum price for a Super Nintendo game that I ever remember seeing was maybe $50, but most of them were $60 or $70. This has been the case now for a while. A lot of people out there are used to like these small indie studios. They're making these games on Steam that are $20, $30, $40, or they see some Nintendo games that have been $50, $60, and now they're seeing $79. Dude, this has been around a while. I remember Atari 2600 games. They were $30 in some cases. I remember when Atari 2600 games went on closeout at Toys R Us because Nintendo had wiped it off the map. I remember when they went on closeout at Toys R Us, they were still $10 to $20 on closeout as the system was dead. What has absolutely been amazing about video games like this, what's truly amazing about video games like this, the price basically hasn't changed. Actually, if you inflation adjust the cost of a video game compared to the 80s and 90s, they're like half the price now. I'll repeat that for people that think I just misspoke. If you really inflation adjust the cost of video games, Super Nintendo games, just look right here, that were $60. I remember paying $50, $49.99 for video games. In 1986, buying NES, original 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System games. $50 for those games, minimum. Legend of Zelda was $50+. I got 2 copies of it. Trust me, I know. Original owner, back there. Gold cartridges, the OG. Those were $50 plus games. If you actually inflation adjust up from a $50 average video game price in 1985 to 40 years later now, in 2025, you realize that these games now for $79 are basically half on a real return basis, a real inflation-adjusted basis. These games are like half the cost. I know everybody thinks I'm crazy right now, but it's true. What was a movie ticket price in 1985? It was like $4, maybe $5, depending on where you lived. Let's call it $5. What was the average ticket price for Snow White and Captain America Brave New World in a PLF screen, which is where most people go watch it? $15. If we actually inflation adjusted a Nintendo Entertainment System, an 8-bit NES game, Legend of Zelda, $50 at Toys R Us, or wherever the hell you bought it. Babbage's, no, that was probably before. It was probably a few years before Babbage's came out. EB Games, somebody brought up earlier, maybe they still have them in Australia. KB Toys, wherever you bought them from. If you actually inflation adjusted up that $50 Nintendo Entertainment System game to 2025, like we have with ticket prices, you realize that $50 Zelda game today would be $150? Think about it. Now, why has there not been the same kind of inflation here on these games that everybody's talking about? And these are the kind of fun Valiant Renegade and Renegade Nation conversations I still love to have from time to time. Get a little deep in the weeds, but hey, this is what we're here for. Here's the deal. And you look at what's on the screen. Tetris Dr. Mario combo game. And I remember a lot of these prices, guys. I mean, these are not far off, even if this was Canadian dollars at the time. And Donkey Kong Country was $69 instead of $79 here in the U.S. I'm telling you, these things were still $60 and $70 back in the 90s. So here's the deal. Back then, Atari cartridges, NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Master System, the 8-bit, Sega Genesis, right? All of the physical cartridge games. You had to invest in a factory that would create the injection molded plastic case that was custom to your console. Atari's custom molded case was different from Nintendo's. The Atari 2600's custom molded case was different from the 7800's case. Then you had ColecoVision, and then you had Nintendo Entertainment System, which had a big fat wide cartridge that was thin. You had Sega Master System that was a little cassette tape size. Sega Genesis was different from the Master System. Super Nintendo's injection molded case size was different from NES. Every time one of those new game systems came out, a whole new manufacturing process and plant, mold, and everything had to be set up to accommodate that production. Then, every game that you developed, you had to have a cartridge, and inside that cartridge, what did you have? You had a printed board with resistors and capacitors, and you had microchips in it and all this kind of stuff. You had to physically print the board, and then all of these little parts on that board had to be soldered in to do whatever it needed to do, like a motherboard in a computer. And then that microchip, whatever little memory casing they had on there, had to be loaded with the game. And by the way, remember, in the 80s and 90s, the cost of those memory chips and those parts that went onto those printed boards, those are a lot more expensive than they are today, right? Because they were still fairly new 40 years ago, 30 years ago than they were compared to today. Then came the advent of the CD-ROM. And then, of course, the DVD, the optical media, right? A uniform system, meaning that, you know, if we went out back in the 90s, y'all remember this, guys? We'd go out when you could do this, and once you could buy CDs, like blank CDs. Remember when you could first get the first CD-ROM drive that you could write to on a computer? Oh my God, it was crazy. You could burn your own CDs. Okay, here's the thing. They were uniform. So all of a sudden, whether you were Nintendo on a GameCube, or you were the Sega Saturn, or the PlayStation 1, all of a sudden, all of the media was the same. Everybody was on a CD. Everybody was on an optical disc. Meaning that the same manufacturer could crank out 30 million copies of a blank optical disc that could effectively be used on the same manufacturing process by Nintendo and Sega and Sony and everybody else. Later, Xbox. DVDs, same thing. Blu-ray discs, now 4K discs. So it eliminated a lot of the extra cost of physical production for the games themselves. Then we went to digital, right? Then most people were buying games without even having to acquire a physical copy, which had to have its own DVD, right? And you and I could go buy a spindle of CDs at Office Depot or Circuit City back in the day, or how about CompUSA? Who remembers CompUSA? This guy. You could go down to these stores, Walmart, whatever. You'd buy a spindle of CDs for, 50 CDs for $20, $50, depending on what year this was. If you're Nintendo or you're Sega or you're Sony and you're buying these things at scale, right? You're buying these things at, 10 million copies. You're not paying $1 a pop. You might be paying 10 cents a pop. But then we got rid of physical media. Then we just went straight digital. Hey, plug in your PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox, whatever the hell they're on now. I don't do Xbox. Download the game. The $79 copy of Final Fantasy III in 1994 here in the U.S., best game ever made, next to Super Metroid and Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. Now you get now you download games for $79 because all of the physical manufacturing costs have been eliminated. All of the physical distribution costs of having to ship those games to thousands, tens of thousands of retailers, all of that cost of shipping has been eliminated. There's so much more that the video game industry has been able to eliminate in terms of hard costs, manufacturing, liability risks, all those kind of things by simply saying now, oh, you turn on the console that we sell you and you just boop, hit the download button and you can bring the game down onto a memory card inside the console. And all the costs of physical manufacturing, physically shipping physical games is gone, right? And bit for bit, it's the same game that you pick up on a piece of physical media. Now, you guys know me. I'm a big fan of physical media. I'd rather have the physical copy. But the point is that most of the market has moved away from that. And this is why the economic dynamics have changed so much over time to the point to where the $79 game in 1993, the current version of it, Final Fantasy 16, that I'm still playing because I've been playing Final Fantasy since 1987 when the first one came out. Final Fantasy 16, it's $79. Pretty much just the same thing my dad paid for Final Fantasy 3 in 1994. Yeah. Now we're going to get $79 games again. Because a lot of those Nintendo Switch games, people were happy at $60. But we've had $80 games before, and we've had $70 games before, 20 and 30 years ago. This is not new.
Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.